Good evening and welcome. Are you alone right now? Strange sounds in the night, shadows where there shouldn't be? If so, you might not be imagining things. So close your eyes, relax, and let the dark take over. When I moved into our current house, I was around 8. This was back in '05. I remember that we had this boring and very ugly front door. It was doubly annoying because the mechanism that locks the door in place was broken. You could continuously spin the doorknob in either direction and have it not open. So we took the mechanism out, and you would just need to push or pull the door in order to get it open. Now, I was about to head upstairs when I noticed that the doorknob was spinning. I pulled open the door to see who was on the other side, and there was no one. I closed the door and was about to turn around again when the doorknob continued to spin. This was only possible if someone was manually turning it. I opened the door once more and there was no one on the other side. I stared at it in wonder when the door flew off its hinges and pushed my head into the corner of the wall. It split my head open and I had to stay for several days at the hospital for a severe concussion. I told my parents that I just fell while holding onto the door when they asked me about it, because I knew that they wouldn't have believed me anyway. We had to replace the whole door frame, which we have today. Another story happened around 4 or 5 years later and involved my brother and I. Around when I was about 12, me and my brother were hanging out in the office room in our house. It was about 3 a.m. when we heard a bell. Not just any bell, but a tricycle bell. Just think of an average bike bell. We freaked the hell out because we were the only two in the house at the time. We looked around the house to not find a thing. The next night, I was alone in the office around the same time when I heard the small bell. I, scared out of my mind, used my glass cup as a makeshift weapon to defend myself as I patrolled around the house. When I got to the kitchen, the tricycle that I had when I was 8, that we sold at a garage sale before we moved into the current house, rolled across the floor. No one was downstairs at the time to roll it, or ring the bell for that matter. We still have the tricycle somewhere. Another story. So my mother works a maximum security prison. There was an inmate that tried to hang himself. She was walking in on him, and she pulled him down and performed CPR. She ended up getting his heart to start again, but the damage was already done. The man was brain dead. This traumatized her pretty bad, and she got minor PTSD from it. It was bad enough that she needed therapy. Fast forward about a year or so after the event, stuff started happening around the house. Papers would come flying out of our printer, objects would fall over on their shelves, and the TV would turn on and off at random times. These events escalated until one night my mother woke up with her arm in pain. She looks over and her husband is laying on her arm. She says, "Hey, wake up, you're on my arm." My stepfather nudges her arm some more. "What the hell? Get off my arm." Now, mind you, my mother had surgery on her arm in the past, and it's incredibly painful even to this day. So she is in a lot of pain. She tries to push him off her when she finally says, "Get off my arm, you're hurting me." At this point, my stepfather opens his eyes and turns over, so that all of his weight is pinning my mother's arm down. Except it wasn't my stepfather. This man had a tomato red face, black eyes, and a toothy smile that stretched to either ends of his face to his ear. Good. My mother proceeded to flip out and start crying to stop, and that she was terrified and to get off her arm. My mother eventually pries her arm out from under this intruder and runs downstairs. She wakes the kids up and takes them into the living room to prepare to call 911. My stepdad comes down to the living room, except he is himself. He is wondering what the hell is going on, and my mother is screaming, "Get out of my house! Stay away from me, and stay away from the kids." It was pretty intense. Eventually, my mother saw that it was actually my stepdad and calmed down. It was around this point that she decided it was probably time that they got outside help, so they called my step-grandfather. My step-grandfather's wife has a brother that is a retired priest, and he currently lives somewhere in Mexico. By calling my step-grandpa, they got his contact info and invited him up to the States as a sort of consultant. He ended up flying up and listening to our story. He ended up saying that he heard of paranormal things happening to people in his line of work, but never to the extent that it was happening to us. He ended up giving us the contact information of a female pastor that travels around and deals with this stuff. He described her to us as someone who was especially sensitive to paranormal phenomena. No one, He told us to just call him, tell her that he referred her to us, and to invite her over. Nothing more. He was specific about not telling her anything about what was happening, and that as soon as she steps foot into the house, she'll immediately start to spout off stuff about your house's history, people who have died there, and the like. So we give her a call. My mother followed the priest's instructions, and as they were saying their goodbyes, my pastor starts yelling, "Stop. Someone is trying to talk to you." She's extremely angry. She wants me to tell you that you moved it, and she wants you to put it back where it was right now. And then she hung up. So it just happened that my family was having a garage sale at the time. We moved some of the more useless stuff to the basement. One of these were these dolls. Now, these weren't just any dolls. These were vintage dolls from when my great-grandma was a girl before she passed away. She was extremely adamant about my mother inheriting them. She was definitely the type of person to get angry over something like moving her possessions somewhere. As soon as the pastor hung up, she knew exactly what the pastor was talking about and moved the dolls. Now, the thing with the pastor didn't quite work out. On the day that she was supposed to visit, the pastor forgot our address and phone number and looked on her phone to contact us, except all of our contact information was erased. We ended up calling her later that day, gave her our number and address again, and she said that she was more than willing to still come over. At this point, she got into her car and it wouldn't start. She called a towing company to try and get to the shop so that it could be fixed, except the tow truck got into an accident on the way over to her house. Suffice to say, these were a coincidentally, or maybe not, long string of bad luck, so she was never able to come out. So since that didn't work out, we went to a different source for help. We called a paranormal investigation company that is local to our area. It was an interesting experience to say the least. They came over and spent the night. They split up into groups and investigated a different part of my house. They had cameras and these recorders that supposedly picked up on super low frequencies. One of the things that they caught floating somewhere in our guest room, as well as several orbs. They found a whole bunch of stuff on the voice recorders and they interviewed, or so they say, for different entities. They identified a young girl, an older teenager, and a woman by the name of Lorelei and a man named Frank. Now this caught my mother's attention because it just so happened that the man that my mother resuscitated was called Frank. Upon more investigation, the man said that he liked my mother and hated my stepfather. That was about all that happened with that. For a while, the paranormal investigators became kind of famous within their community because they got a lot of evidence. So around this time is when I took some leave from the Navy and came back home. It was very quiet while I was there, except for one night. I was sitting in the living room reading when I felt like someone was watching me. Me. It got so bad that I actually went outside with a flashlight and started looking through bushes because I was convinced that someone was stalking me. It ended up being nothing, and the feeling went away after a couple of hours. Fast forward to a couple of months ago. My uncle's childhood best friend that we hadn't talked to in many years stopped by for a barbecue. He had a new girlfriend. As soon as my family friend and his girlfriend stepped through the door, the woman stopped abruptly and asked my mother, "How many do you have?" My mother said, "I have 5 children. 4 are from me and the other is a stepdaughter." "No, that's not what I meant," my mother said uncertainly. "We have 4 ghosts. A little girl, a teenager, a woman, and a man." "No, you have at least 2 men, because I have 2 brutes that are currently screaming in my face and telling me to get out." My mother and her had a very long conversation. Now, I would take what I'm about to tell you with a grain of salt. As soon as my mother told me this, I said, "No way. That's the most tall-tale bullcrap I've ever heard." But you never know. Maybe I'm wrong. The woman told my mother that she's always had the ability to see ghosts all of her life, among other things such as telekinetic abilities. She used to shatter light bulbs above her mother's head when she was a little girl. One day, her teacher was being mean to her. The next thing you know, the teacher is being lifted up off the air and pinned against the wall by some invisible. She said the government hadn't had contact with her in some time. Yeah, I'm not too sure about that last part, but whole sensitivity thing was obviously pretty consistent with our experiences. Something else that she told us was that the whole land around us was still haunted as hell. She said that the neighbors across from us have nothing less than an infestation, and she had never seen anything like it. She ended up leaving, and all of the paranormal events stopped. She later contacted my mother and mentioned that the 2 men that were shouting at her left with her because they found out that she could see and hear them. They started messing with her by hiding her stuff under her bed and knocking things over. She told us that she could get rid of them, though, and since then it's been quiet. No problems except for this one time that my mother was alone in her room when the spring door stopper started randomly vibrating side to side. Not in the O. There must be a big truck that just shook the house kind of way. More than this was someone pulling that thing to its full range of motion and letting it go, as if someone was playing with it. My mother remembered the little girl ghost that was at the house and said, "I know you're there, honey. It's okay if you want to play a bit. You can stay here as long as you're not mean." And that was that. I am definitely a skeptic, but one experience I had house sitting for my aunt and uncle definitely raises some questions for me. They were going out of town for a weekend and asked if I would keep an eye on the house and take care of their dogs while they were away. I was staying with my grandparents for the summer, as I usually did, and being a 16-year-old with a brand new driver's license, I jumped at the chance for a few days of freedom with a house to myself during my summer vacation. I picked up my PlayStation, rented some games and movies, and stocked up on snacks and headed over to their place. The first night there was uneventful, but I remember feeling slightly uneasy being in the house. Nothing out of the ordinary was going on. I just attributed the uneasiness to being in the house alone for the first time without my aunt or uncle there. Around 1 a.m., I decided to go to bed and let the dogs out in the backyard to relieve themselves before bed. After they were done, I made sure everything was locked, doing the deadbolt and chain locks on the doors. I woke up the next morning, put some coffee on, and got the dogs up to let them out. The uneasiness remained. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, even though I knew that no one else was around. After breakfast, I decided I was going to go for a bike ride and meet up with some friends. I put the dogs into their crates, locked up, and headed out. I was gone for maybe 4 hours until mid-afternoon when I decided to head back to the house. When I walked in, the dogs were freaking out. Not your normal happy to see you let me out the crate excitement, but full-blown panic, shaking and foaming at the mouth and howling the works. These dogs are normally very calm and are perfectly content to spend most of the day in their crates sleeping as they go in on their own for naps. So this was really out of the ordinary. I opened the doors to their crates, but neither of them wanted to come out. Being a little freaked out myself at this point, I decided to check the house to make sure nothing had happened. All the windows were fine, everything was still locked, and the house was completely empty. At this point, I should mention how the house is laid out. It's an old house, late 1800s, and prior to my aunt and uncle owning it, it was divided up as a duplex. The upstairs was a separate apartment. They mentioned that an older woman had rented the upstairs while the previous owners lived downstairs. My aunt and uncle didn't rent the upstairs, but didn't really do anything to convert the house back into a single-family dwelling. My uncle used the upstairs apartment as his home office with several computers and a couple of modems, early 2000s dialer. And most of the time, the door to the upstairs and the enclosed porch of the kitchen just stayed closed and locked. There wasn't really any reason to go up there. I decided in an abundance of caution, since the dogs were so freaked out, that I should check the whole house. I unlocked the door to the upstairs and went up to check. I noticed that one of the computers was on. This was odd, as my uncle had said in his note that he'd shut off everything upstairs and unplugged the surge protectors. Maybe he meant to do so, but got into a rush to get out the doors and forgot. No big deal. We were expecting storms later, so I shut the computer down, unplugged everything, and went back downstairs, locking the door behind me. By this point, the dogs had calmed down and taken their usual spots on the couch, where I joined them to play some PlayStation. After dinner at around 8 p.m., the dogs and I were still on the couch watching movies and just chilling out, when all of a sudden one of the dogs stands up on the couch with all of the fur on his back standing on end and begins growling towards the direction of the door to the stairs. He continued to do this for the next 5 to 10 minutes, and nothing I did would distract him from whatever he was sensing. He eventually calmed down and laid beside me again. A few hours later, at 11 p.m., he resumed this, and the other dog joined in too this time. That's when I began to hear creaking coming from upstairs, like someone stepping on a loose floorboard. It didn't sound like footsteps, just like someone rocking back and forth on the loose boards. Properly freaked out now, I went to investigate. This time I noticed that the door to the upstairs was now unlocked. I had locked it when I went up there earlier. Oh crap. Someone might be in the house. I took a few steps back into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. You know, like a horror movie cliche, I checked the porch door to the backyard, which would be where someone would come into to get into the upstairs apartment. It was still locked. Okay, weird. The creaking upstairs was still happening. I opened the doors to the stairs and it stopped immediately. I turned the lights on and ascended. Nothing. I was freaking out over nothing. It was probably just the house settling. It was, after all, an old house. These things creaked and groaned all the time. A little embarrassed with myself for getting so freaked out, I went back downstairs again, locking the door behind me. I decided to get some sleep, popped in another movie, curled up on the couch, and passed out. I was awoken at 2 a.m. a few hours later to the dogs again in full-blown panic mode. This time I could hear them creaking again. And then something else happened. I heard a dial tone. I heard a modem upstairs dial some numbers. I heard it try to connect. Was I still asleep? No, I was definitely awake. I again grabbed the knife, went to the upstairs door, unlocked it, and opened the door, and the noises immediately again cut off. I went upstairs again to check. Nothing. Everything was still off and unplugged just as I had left it. I went back downstairs, locked everything up, and went to try and calm the dogs down. About 10 minutes later, I heard the modem start up again. It would dial, try to connect, stop, and then dial again, and again, and again. The creaking was back too, and this time it did sound like someone was walking around up there, even though I knew I was alone and had checked every conceivable place in the house for an intruder to hide. I put up with this for another half hour or so, and it didn't let up. The dogs wouldn't calm down either. Eventually, I'd had enough. I grabbed the dogs, loaded them into my car, and got the hell out of there. I went back to my grandparents' place and stayed with them for the rest of the night with the dogs. The next morning, my grandparents were surprised to see me there and asked what had happened. I relayed the previous night's events to them, feeling like a crazy person for what I had experienced. Strangely, they didn't seem surprised at all. They then told me that was the first time something strange happened there and that my aunt and uncle had all kinds of stories about the place. For example, my little cousin frequently woke up screaming that a shadow man was looking at him in his bed, and my uncle going upstairs to work on his computers one day and discovering that the gas stove had turned on, leaking gas into the house, and all kinds of things had been misplaced or doors left unlocked. I still don't think I believe in the paranormal and consider myself an agnostic atheist, but I still can't find a reasonable explanation for what happened and what I experienced that weekend. It was all too weird. My BFF, myself, and a mutual best friend rented a super old, think in the early 1900s, house, situated perfectly on the edge of the bad part of town, the college-only part of town, and on the way to the good part of town. So it was heavily trafficked by classmates and a big party place. BFF is super into paranormal stuff, but not weird about it. Very level-headed. Think raised in rural Appalachia and all the folklore that goes along with it. Our mutual best friend wasn't heavily oriented either way, but pretty open to that sort of stuff. I was an avid denier despite having a few unexplainable experiences in the past. The knocking started happening pretty much immediately, but none of us figured it out for about a month because we thought it was just happening to us individually. Like one of us would be in our bedroom or the bathroom. It was especially likely in the bathroom door and any door leading out of my mutual best friend's room. For whatever reason, it never happened with any exterior doors, and there'd come a knock on the door. We would shout, "Come in," or "Who is it?" To no answer, just another knocking, always loud and formal, like 3 perfectly timed knocks. You would call "Come in" or whatever, as long as you liked. There would never be any answer and never anyone actually there. I thought it was my roommates just screwing around her old house stuff. I don't know. I was 22. And the others initially thought variations of the same thing. Then we were sitting around smoking a bowl one night, and my best friend forever brings up the knockings, explaining what's been going on. And we all look around at each other, that kind of holy crap, you too? Moment, and we all swapped stories. We laughed, because it didn't really feel super threatening with all of us just chatting about it. My BFF suggests paranormal. Mutual best friend kind of laughs it off and says maybe. And I flat out dismiss it because no way. And we go on. It keeps happening mostly randomly, but it's happening now when other people are actually on the other side of doors. So it's not 1%, just random hallucinations passing back and forth. On the night it got really overt, BFF and I were just sitting on the couch watching TV. MBF in his bedroom with doors shut. One of his bedroom doors went directly into the bathroom, one directly into the living room where my BFF and I were watching TV, and a third directly into my bedroom. Think sort of circular layout with doors going through common areas but also connecting sleeping areas. So BFF and I are in the living room and can see the shut bedroom door of the mutual best friend as well as the open bathroom door from the common area. We can clearly see that no one is in the bathroom and can clearly see the mutual best friend's bedroom door. Suddenly, the mutual best friend shouts, "Come in," although we didn't hear knocking. But that often happened. Only the person responding was actually hearing the noise. BFF and I share a glance, giggle, and go to hit the bowl again. When we hear "come in" loud and angry from the room, okay, fair enough. It gets aggravating after a while, but clearly there is no one at the other door, so we don't know why he's bothering to get louder. I'm opening my mouth to shout something smart while looking at my BFF. And I remember this part super clearly because it was surprising. When there's a huge bang, like something heavy had been dropped from a long way in the mutual best friend's bedroom, and it startled us both badly. Then, less than a second later, he comes flying out the door, nearly ripping the door off its hinges, and races into the living room with us. And he stopped at the opposite wall, breathing really heavily, eyes way too wide, and is staring at us, scared to death. We are equally alarmed from the first noise, then from the look he's giving us, and then his room. We're almost shouting at him to explain what happened, and he said he got annoyed because the knocking was coming from both doors, from the bathroom and from the living room. And he went to jerk open the bathroom door, but when he started to pull on it, it yanked out of his hand and closed, like way harder than should have been possible. And that was the noise. It also scared him into nearly pissing himself, so he bolted. The knocking continued randomly throughout the rest of our time in the house. Guests would hear it and respond all the time. Eventually, most people who were at our place more than once a week knew the story, and our advice was pretty universal. Not to respond to it, but to walk to the doors and open them instead. This wasn't anything clever. We just got super tired of people shouting "come in" from different rooms all of the time. The baby stuff. These ones had a lot more feel of something possibly sentient or, I don't know, more symbolism or something than knocking. It's hard to explain. Hopefully it'll make more sense once I've got the story told. But these stories feel a lot more like stereotypical ghost movie behavior than some of the other creepier stuff that was more obtuse or random. So again, this stuff started happening almost at once, but we didn't realize it because we thought it was legitimate, or that it was just any single of us being mistaken or possibly being high or crazy. It always happened when anyone was laying down, and I never heard it in another place or time. Here's mine. I was laying down midday, about to take a power nap, and heard a baby crying. It sounded very close, right outside the house perhaps. I went into my BFF's room as it's right beside mine, and it sounded like it was coming from there. I listened and still sounded right outside, like the window. I looked out of it and heard it clearly, but there was no source. There was a house right next to us, but the windows were down and it sounded super clear. Still, I chalked it up to a loud baby and weird acoustics and thought nothing of it. It happened a few more times and kept being weird because it was so clear and more during the day than the night. But I still chalked it up to the neighbors having a very loud baby. I spoke to the BFF about it one afternoon in passing, and she looks and says that she's noticed it too. It's so weird because it sounds so close, and agree that it is weird. And forget about it, because what are we going to do about it? We speak to the mutual best friend. This convo was a bit later than the big scary knocking incident, so he's understandably less dismissive of the weird stuff now. And he agrees he's heard it, so really didn't care to check about it. A few days later, he returns and lets us know he passed the neighbors, who we hadn't met or cared to because we were 22, sitting on their porch to find out that they were 3 fairly elderly African-American gentlemen with no baby in sight. Mutual best friend paused to ask if they had a baby around or often if they heard a baby crying during the day. The men give adamant refusals to both questions. So my BFF and mutual best friend at this point are feeling fairly crazy overall. She's sure it's a ghost or multiple, but the mutual best friend is sure it's something. I'm mostly annoyed, but also I'm not a total idiot, so I'm admitting that something is weird. So we start asking people who spend a lot of time in the house. Close friends, dealers, buyers. significant others, and people allowed to chill at our spot between places if they're having any of these experiences. Turns out that most of them had heard the baby crying, mostly during the day and always when they're laying down on the couch or on a bed, whatever. But no one ever heard it initially while they were up and about. We circled the house inside and out a dozen times while we hear it with different people and different times, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. The best way to describe it was if you were standing in my BFF's bedroom. It sounded as if it was just on the other side of the exterior wall to the house. If you went to the exact spot of the house outside, it sounded like the crying was coming from just the other side inside my best friend's room. That's where it was loudest, and no one else could detect it coming any more strongly from any other direction. Weird as hell. I lived in 4 creepy and haunted houses. They all had some pretty horrifying things, but the third one was the scariest. I was in high school when me, my mom, and stepdad lived there. I moved in with them when I was 15. My mom had married him a few months before. Anyway, one night, I noticed the doorknob on my bedroom door was shaking, like horribly shaking. It was locked though. I thought maybe it was like a train, but it kept happening. I thought that maybe it was my stepdad being a creep. I didn't know him very well at that point. So I started leaving it unlocked to try and see if it was him trying to get in. It would still just shake. Then it happened. Day, night, anytime I shut the door. Sometimes I would get up at night to get a snack, since I've had a hard time sleeping since I was a kid. I'd hear footsteps behind me or the floor creaking. It was a really small house too, and no one else was up. There's not anywhere to hide. I'd feel my shirt tug sometimes too, just at the bottom of it, like a little kid would do when they want attention. The scariest 2 things are one morning, it was winter and around 6 a.m. or so still dark outside, and I was in the living room watching TV and getting ready for school. My stepdad was in the back of the house in his room sleeping, and my mom was heading out the front door to work, and she turned around and said bye to me. And we hear this little girl's voice clear as day say goodbye. My mom looked at me and I screamed, and her husband comes running up asking what happened. And my mom told him and then was like, well, moat to this. Bye, and left. And the last scary thing was that our neighbor, whose backyard connected to ours, but they lived around the corner, came over to yell at my mom one day, saying that she's a crappy mom for letting our little sister out all night and play on the swing. We had a rope tied to a tree that no one ever used, and my youngest sister lived in another town with my dad, and so my mom was really confused. The neighbor said she would go out for a smoke at night and would see a little girl swinging on the rope and laughing, and she'd see it multiple times when she went out. My aunt works at the city and did research saying that our house had been moved from another location. It was really old. I don't know if either of these attributed to the little girl or what. About 8 to 10 years ago, my family moved into a small house in Beech Grove, Indiana. It was a 2-story house with a basement. Our basement was used as a playroom for me and my 2 siblings. It was shaped in an odd way, almost like a horseshoe. It had a divider wall running horizontally down the basement. One side was a playroom, and the other had our washer, dryer, and storage space. The storage space was creepy as hell, and no one liked going back there. It was straight out of a horror movie. Dark, with only a single light bulb in the center of the room that had a pull string dangling and warm colors on the walls. The best part is that on the other side of the thin divider wall was the kids' playroom. Anyway, one day my dad gets kidney stones, and at around 9 p.m. or so, he decides he needs to go to the hospital. My mom asked if I wanted to come along with him and my siblings, and I say no, because I'm really into the racing video game scene that I'm playing. So I'm playing my game without a care in the world, and I finish up a race close and whistle to myself as if to say, phew, that was a close race. Then I hear it. My whistle responded back to me from the other side of the divider wall. At first I thought it was just an echo, so I whistled something more complicated. Almost immediately it whistled back. I kept whistling and heard mimic responses for a solid 2 minutes. I finally got freaked out and ran upstairs and locked myself in the bathroom. When they finally got home and found me locked in the bathroom crying and freaked out, they believed me when I told them. They tell me Dad has always felt uneasy in their house, but didn't want to say anything to not scare us kids. There was nothing that could be done, so we all went our separate ways to bed. Later that same night, my mother was awoken by my dad swaying his leg back and forth, moving the bed. She looked at him and asked why he was doing it. He said he couldn't help that and that they were rocking the bed. She asked who they were, and he told her that people around our bed, don't you see them? She didn't see anything. Needless to say, we do not live there anymore. I don't believe in the supernatural, and I never have. But things happened to me that I honestly cannot explain, neither at the time nor now. It wasn't my sister. I don't know what it was, but to this day, I seriously doubt that my sister would be sexually and physically assaulting me. I saw it one time when I was 16. I was laying in my bed, not asleep, just staring out of my bedroom window because I couldn't bring myself to feel tired at all. I remember it was about 1:30 in the morning and I had gotten into a fight with my mother, coincidentally about staying up all night when I had school the next day. So when I heard my door open, I immediately lied down and acted as if I were asleep. So I hear the familiar creaking and cracking of her toes as she walks towards my bed. Her toes pop whenever she walks, and I can hear her coming from across the house, and I'm just laying there pretending like I'm not awake. I hear her voice, and it was a rushed, low whisper. And it wasn't until she was standing almost directly over me that I could hear that she was frantically whispering my name over and over and over and over and over again. I remember my heart was pounding in my chest because she's close enough to me that I can smell her, and she doesn't smell like anything I've encountered before. It was a mixture of rotten ground after a rainstorm and dead fish left in the sun for a week. I opened my eyes, and I could see her illuminated in the moonlight from my window. It wasn't my mother. What was lording over me was a woman that stood a little less than 6 feet tall with stringy and disgusting black hair that fell a little bit past her shoulders. I remember the most horrifying things about her were that, aside from a disgusting grime that covered the sheer white dress, she was completely naked. I could see the dark points of her nipples through the material, and I'm assuming that she wasn't wearing any underwear. Her exposed skin was diseased-looking, extremely frail and thin, but it looked tight, and a network of black veins stretched against it from underneath. She was white, but honestly she was more of an off-green, like an egg that had gone bad. And God, her eyes were just the most horrifying thing I have ever seen. To this day, a perfectly smooth face, no nose, no lips, no ears, just eyes. Eyes that were 4 sizes too large and round, eyes that had no white, had no color, and that were just a solid jet black. The skin around these spherical nightmare windows was crinkled and crusted with flecks of something that looked black, but could have easily been a dark red or brown, as in moonlight it's not easy to distinguish color. She had bug eyes, and they were hovering a half-foot away from my face. I couldn't move. My body was stuck in oh my Jesus Christ mode, and I couldn't even breathe through the terror. She bent over me and knelt onto my bed, and I felt the pressure. I felt the bed move as she rested her knees on either side of my waist, because of course she would be straddling me. Why wouldn't this nightmare be straddling me? It lowered its face down to mine and touched her forehead to my own. And where the contact happened, I felt my skin burn, almost as if I were getting a Lycus from Tyler Durden. I still couldn't move, and I still couldn't breathe. I knew that if I opened my mouth, this, whatever it was going to tear out my soul, and I knew I was screwed. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention that the entire time this thing was grinding on my lap. The only sound in the room was the sound of my brain shrieking and the subtle shuffle of this thing frantically rubbing its crotch against my own. All I could see was its eyes filling up my entire vision. All I could smell was its filthy hair as it brushed against the side of my face, and a more subtle, more terrifying smell of arousal as it enjoyed what it was doing to me. I got the surge of strength back in me, and I rolled to the side trying to knock this thing off, because I thought that maybe I could get it off and then I would run. My bedroom had a door that led to the backyard, and maybe I could just get out there and run and never look back. But no, this thing clings to me, and now I've got this writhing she-beast dragging its dirty fingernails in my back, and they felt like knives. The paralysis sets back in, and as I'm thinking, I realize that as long as this thing was making eye contact with me, I couldn't move. I tried to close my eyes, but it wouldn't work. I tried to shift my vision away, but her forehead was touching mine, and that was all I could literally see. It was those black paws of her own demonic eyes, and I pissed myself in fear. I feel her hand reaching across from my back to my chest and up my throat, where it grips me tightly behind the neck and holds me with more force than anything has ever held me before. It removes its face from directly in front of mine as it's dragging its fetid hair in my face, and I feel it press its smooth, tight skin of its own featureless neck against my own. Now I feel something shift against my neck, like a swarm of flies pressing against my skin. Something wet and very cold touches me. And then I realize that this thing has formed a mouth and it has started to lick me. Where it touches burns like the devil. And now I'm not moving because I'm terrified that if I do, it will use its newfound mouth to tear my throat out. Something sharp then grazes my neck. I try not to think about razor blades. This spurs on whatever this thing is and it resumes grinding. I feel its other hand tear a furrow from my back down to the waist of my pajama bottoms, where it slips under and starts to shift from my back to my waist to the front. I realize this thing is reaching for my genitals, and I summon whatever surge of adrenaline I had left in me to bring my knee up between our bodies, and I kick it as hard as I can. Something sharp tears into my neck, but it's too late. And despite its scrambling hands and tearing nails, I boot this thing off me and hear an audible thud on the other side of the room. I immediately haul ass to my closet, where I keep my machete that I used to clear brush as I had an overgrown backyard. It was clumsy, but really all I did was throw myself in with as much force as I could off at the end of the bed, because that is where the closet was. I turn around with my machete in hand, knowing that I'm about to destroy this thing, and it's gone. There's nothing there. I turn the light on after a serious internal pep talk, and I grab the mattress futon and tear off the lattice metal frame, machete poised to strike the thing that must have scuttled underneath it. But there's nothing. At this point, I'm telling myself that I just had the worst nightmare in the world, and that I have pissed myself, and that I should probably shower. I grab another set of PJs and stagger into the bathroom, leaving the machete in the room, although with great reluctance. I check my neck and I am bleeding a lot. I have a gash that is about 3 inches long, right where the shoulder and neck meet, curving around to my back. My forehead has a red splotch on it, and the skin is peeling back like a very bad sunburn. I turn around and survey the horror scene that is my back. Trenches have been carved, and there is a whole lot of blood everywhere. My back, my sides, and my hips. Thank God I kicked off that creature before she got me in the dick, and the crotch of my pajama pants were covered in this awful stain that smelt like a mixture of blood, sweat, and death. I shower with the curtain open. I turn on the kitchen light, turn on the library light, the living room light, and when I get to my bedroom, I open the door and immediately turn on the light. It's still empty. Although, now that I know what to look for, I see splatters of red blood on my own quilts, and the room smells like a grave. I did not sleep that night or the night after or the one after that. I told a few select people, but nobody believed me. Why would they? Even when I showed them how this thing turned my back and neck into a connect the dots made out of nails. Everyone said I must have just denied myself in my sleep, but some of those marks were in spots that I couldn't myself reach. I still feel like something sits down next to me from time to time when I'm laying in bed, and I'll open my eyes and nothing will be there. I don't sleep more than 4 hours a night, and that's usually broken up into segments. I sleep better in other people's homes than I do my own. It's been a few years since I've encountered it, and I only ever saw it that one time. But considering that it started when I was 11, I don't think it really was a factor for whatever this thing is, and I'm convinced that one day it will be back. And the last thing I will ever see will be those eyes, filling up my vision as it presses its forehead against my own. I wish I could say that this was some horror story that I fabricated or made up. I really do. I don't believe in the supernatural. But that doesn't mean that this didn't happen or that whatever that thing was isn't real. A dorm at a local university had a student die of alcohol poisoning on his 20th birthday. And there have been lots of reports of creepy things happening in the dorm room that he died in. Students reported tapping from the inside of the windows, shoes being rearranged while they were out, and a loud scraping noise that came from upstairs. You must understand that people upstairs thought it was coming from downstairs. Anyway, there was a youth sport camp that uses this dorm for a summer residence, and I was a counselor. So I stayed in the dorm with the kids. I was assigned to stay in the room that the aforementioned student perished in. I grew up in the same town as the college, so I knew about the ghost and I didn't think anything of it. There's no such thing as ghosts, right? I moved in, and the only thing that looked different about the room compared to other rooms in the dorm anyway was that in this one, there was a crucifix. During my week, shit got weird. Several times I heard loud tapping from the inside of my window. One night I poked my head outside of my door late and yelled lights out to some kids running down the hall. My lights promptly turned on by themselves inside my room. Finally, during a break at the end of the week, I went back to my room for a nap. I found my TV was on and the volume was extremely loud. I didn't think much of it. Maybe the kids had been playing PS2 in my room and had forgotten to turn it off. I grabbed the remote, lay on the bed, and hit the power button, but the TV stayed on. I took the batteries out and tried again, to no avail. I picked up my lazy ass, walked to the TV, and pressed the power button. Nothing. I turned down the volume. Nothing. I finally unplugged the TV. Nothing. I am totally freaking out. I unplugged the cable from the TV, thinking that without the power, it would have to come out. Nope. I sat there holding the TV power cord, the cord cable, and the remote, and was watching the TV continue to play. I ran from the room, got another counselor, and showed him. He promptly freaked out, and we left the building to get the camp director. And when he got to my room, the TV was off. I guess the guy just really wanted to watch Jeremy Springer. When I was born, my family lived in an older house. I'm British, so when I say old, I mean very old. When I was a kid, a young girl used to look after me in my bed. She would always come and look down at me and smile. One night, I was trying to sleep, but she just kept poking and pushing me. I was very young, so it made me cry. My parents were pissed off because they came into my room and had to wake up. They took me downstairs and put me down there, hoping I would give up crying and go to sleep. When my dad left the room, she came back and kept on prodding me again and again until I started crying. After a little while, my dad came down, and just before he came into the room, she smiled and left. When my father came into the room, he said there was smoke coming from the floor, and he ran everyone out of the house. Turns out there was an electrical fault under the floor, and the house almost caught fire. A little later on, my father was up a ladder fixing something on the side of the house. The ladder fell over and he broke his leg. To this day, he claims that something had hit the ladder. Whenever anyone went to the loft or the attic, it felt cold and you felt like someone was watching you. The final straw was when my mother woke up in the middle of the night and sat up to see a young girl looking at her. I think it was the same girl who used to look down at me. My mother felt that this was a warning sign from her and that we had to leave. We did that next morning, and the day after that, the top floor collapsed into the lower floor, almost destroying the house in its entirety. I'd never been sure if that girl was looking out for me or attacking me. But bad things only ever happened to me, my brother, or my dad. Never my mother. After we left, the house had to be repaired, and when it came for a new family to move in, they had a son who was quite sadly born with brain damage. Take from that what you will. About 10 years later, my father got a blood clot and was pronounced medically dead for 10 minutes before he managed to come back. I asked him about it afterwards, and he felt like he was lying on the ceiling looking down at himself. He decided it was not the right time to die and decided to live. For a couple of years after, strange things happened to him. Sometime later, we were driving down an A road. For those of you who have never been to England, these are fast roads with a speed limit of 60 miles per hour, but are different to the motorway or highway, and tend to meander and have roads joining them in odd places. As we were driving down the road, my father looked up at a car coming on the road on the right and said, "I need to stop." He pulled to a stop, but the other car didn't. It carried on straight across the road onto the small embankment on the other side. If my father had never stopped, well, we would have been plowed into. The car would have no doubt been hit on the side, killing me and him for sure. Afterwards, he just said that he heard someone saying that he needed to stop. Let's go on a few years, skipping some minor events and going on to the next big one. I went to a grammar school in a crazy area. The school was actually converted from an old hospital, and the library was the old chapel. The art room was an old wardroom, and the classrooms were converted from offices and old labs. It was a very crazy place. I was playing rugby after school and had a minor injury when another player accidentally stamped on my head. I know, accidentally. School had already left after the nurse said I was okay to go, so I called my father to come and collect me. I went out to wait for him at the main gates, and as I waited, a taxi pulled up, and the driver yelled, "Taxi for Jerry?" I thought the lazy guy had sent a cab instead of coming himself, so I jumped in, went home. I got there and no one was home, and I was a little confused but sat down to wait for my parents to arrive. About 30 minutes later, the phone rang and it was my school, and everyone, including my father, was searching the grounds for me. There were no other Jerrys in my school, surprisingly, and my father didn't call a cab. It was quite a strange coincidence, and on the way back home, my father was delayed in traffic, where two cars had crashed 20 minutes earlier, just the time when we would have been driving home. And you know what the best part was? I didn't even have to pay for the cab. There are two incidences in my life that I still cannot rationally explain. The first happened when I was 14, the first week after my family moved into a new house. We liked the house. It was comfortable. But one night I woke up in the middle of the night to find a man staring down at me in bed. He was short, somewhat portly, perhaps Italian, and was older and balding. He wore a plaid shirt with yellow in it and blue jeans. I freaked the hell out and hid under the covers and said some prayers. And when I peeked out some seconds later, he, of course, was gone. About 10 years later, my family and I were at the dinner table, and the topic of the paranormal came up, which gave me enough courage to share my story to my family in the hopes that I wouldn't be ridiculed. Bear in mind, I had never told anyone this story, not my family, not my friends, not a soul. So I told them that I'd seen a man, that's it, that I'd seen a man, and then my dad turned white and asked me more questions about the man. He then asked if the man was wearing a yellow plaid shirt and blue jeans. At that moment, we stared each other in the eyes and my blood ran cold. Yes, he was, I confirmed. My dad then said he had seen the same man twice, once in his master bedroom. He was looking up in the mirror, and he saw the man facing back at him, and when he turned, he was gone. In another occasion, he was in his master closet, picking out a nice shirt. He turned and saw the man just standing there facing the clothing rack. Also, regarding that closet, I had a weird experience when I was about 18. I was in the master bedroom watching TV because someone was using the one downstairs, and I didn't like staring into the dark closet because I'm afraid of them. So I get up to close it, I push the door closed, but then the door was yanked out of my hand, and a male gruff voice demanded, "What?" It wasn't the TV. I was watching the Weather Channel, and it had music playing whilst the forecast was being set. I ran downstairs and recounted what happened to my mother, and I refused to go back into that closet again. The final one. The second house I lived in was a new subdivision. The town was on the shores of Lake Ontario, on land previously inhabited by the Iroquois Native people. New subdivisions always have to be investigated by archaeologists in case a significant site was discovered, or the construction constantly unearthed pottery, arrowheads, and more. So I was 3 when we moved into the house, and this experience is my father's. He was setting up his weightlifting equipment in the back of the unfinished basement. And one day, while he was bench pressing, he opened his eyes to find a native Canadian man staring grimly down at him, wearing animal skins and bird feathers. Dad freaked out, sat up, and tried to say something, but the man, of course, was gone. When I was about 8, I was going to bed in my room when a gray thing about the size of a football slowly moved across the foot of my bed, slightly pulling the blankets as it went. When it got to the end and I couldn't find a trace of it, we had cats, but my door was closed and none were in my room at the time. My parents didn't believe me, and I can't say I would have if I were one of my kids, and I was terrified for ages. In the same room as the previous event, I had a door which opened to a screen porch type thing. There was no other way to get into it as it was locked many times from the inside at the other exit. Every so often, the door would make a sound which was like someone throwing their whole body against it, a very loud thump with various elements, as if different limbs were striking it. So it was definitely odd. It sounded like someone was on the other side and was pretty well defined as noises come. This happened during any time of the day. It didn't matter. One evening, it just kept happening over and over, like someone was trying to break their way into my room. I made my dad check it out while I stood behind to see, and there was nothing. He closed it up, locked the door, and went about his business. Then it started again, quietly at first, then building up into loud crashes. I had Dad check again. There was nothing there. I have no idea what it was, but it was freaky as hell. In the same house, there were lots of little things, which I'm sure had more to do with being freaked out than a kid than anything else. But I could be wrong. I had many instances of terrible sleep paralysis where I could feel something grabbing lightly at the foot of me or pushing in my belly and chest. I would often see cats skirt about my feet or around doorways when there was no cat there. I would hear angry, indecipherable whispers when sleeping in the living room of the creepy old house. During the same time period, but this was in my friend's house, the following event occurred. She lived in a two-family home on the top floor. They had a shared attic with a stairway up to it, which was next to her room. Her downstairs neighbor was an elderly woman, and she lived there for many years. After she died, we would often hear very human-sounding footsteps in the attic, but not going up the stairs behind her room to the attic, which were normally very audible. When I was pregnant with my first child, we lived in a small house in New Mexico. One day I'm sitting on my computer and a dog starts barking in our yard. So I turn around and look out the window. As I do this, I see what I think is our dog walking from the front door past the couch into the bedroom. Only then I realize that our bedroom door is closed and our dog is outside. This one freaked me out quite a bit because it happened when I was an adult and is very difficult to explain away. A few years ago, we were living in our new home in Texas. I'm home alone with the kids and my husband is out of town for work. It's the middle of the day, so I wasn't exactly freaked out when all of a sudden something bangs on the house from the outside. It's not unusual, it could be anything. Then it happens again on the other side, then the back door, and it keeps going around the house in circles and getting faster. It was way too quick for it to have been something running circles around the house. When I finally get the nerve to open the back door and look, there's nothing there. It stopped after I looked and gave me a big pit in my stomach. When I was growing up, my parents moved into a newly remodeled home. Apparently, it used to be a furniture parlor. Because of its location, which is not too terribly close to anything, it was a pretty great price. Now, the first thing you have to know about my parents is that they've never been known to lie to my brother and I. Even though I was young, I remember that house vividly. It was small, and all the rooms were minuscule, though there were a lot of them. Even the stairs were kind of funny, tiny steps that snaked around the far wall of the home and made loud sounds when stepped on. During the day, the house was tame, albeit old. However, at night, when my parents would put my brother and I to sleep, shit got real. The pans downstairs would clank together and then loud booming as someone stomped up the stairs. The next thing I can remember is the bed shaking left and right. Oftentimes, our Ernie and Bert piggybacks would start to shake and they'd turn around. Being young, we didn't like them looking at us at night, so we would face them towards the wall and they'd always be turned around again. Even our parents both remember how they could hear the chains jingling around as the banks moved. By morning, it would all be back to normal and the cycle would repeat. I moved into a new house in March 2011. The house was built in 1920. My dog came with me when we got the house inspected, and she was running up and down the stairs and seemed happy and healthy. I was working in the house prior to moving in one day and found myself in the basement. Around 5 p.m., I heard a door close at the top of the stairs. I then heard footsteps on the floor above. I then mistakenly start talking to whatever was down there. I said they could stay in the house if they didn't scare my wife or my pets. I went upstairs and found the front and back doors locked. I was inside the house, alone. And then I got really intense feelings all over my body that felt like pins and needles to the 10th power. The next day, I was once again in the basement. I was rooting around in a toolbox when I saw a roll of sandpaper unraveling by itself. I was gone at this time too. A short while later, I was looking for another toolbox in a case that was 4 feet away and slammed violently on the ground. I then mistakenly spoke to the spirit again and told them to get out. I then heard a loud thud at the top of the stairs. Shortly after, we moved into the basement and started to renovate the 2 top floors. I had never had any kind of problems with the renovation into the basement, and I had never seen the kind of problems with the renovation that this house presented. My daughter visited the house and said the master bedroom was haunted. She said the spirit comes and goes, but shouldn't be a problem, and the problem continued. My dog also started to decline physically. When we cleaned out the attic, we found a voodoo love potion and spell books and a VD handbook together in a box. Unbeknownst to me, my wife dug up a wheelbarrow full of trolls and other dolls in our backyard. We took the dogs to the vet the next few times, and they could not find anything wrong with her. She would just lie under our bed all day and all night. Finally, we took her to another vet in August. The vet told me she had full cancer, and we put her down the next day. We were devastated. I thought that whatever was in our house had harmed the dog. My wife and daughter disagreed, and I was having nightmares regularly. They found almost always to be some type of force that would hold me down, and I would awaken terror after being unable to get the force away from me. We finally called the guy who dealt with our type of problem. He said his cell phone just went blank as he walked into our house. He said he could feel the energy coming from the house, standing on the sidewalk in front. He came inside the house and immediately went to the areas where I heard the noises and saw the sandpaper unravel. He said that someone had been practicing voodoo in the house, and that at the core of the house was affected. He did a few things and drew a few symbols, and you could feel an immediate difference in the house. He explained the spirits were trying to attack me, and when I didn't back down or show fear, they went after the dog. He said that explains the dog sensing this, and they were trying to attack me. But when I didn't back down or show fear, they just went for her. He said the dog sensed this and put herself in harm's way in order to protect me. He said the dog and I shared the purest form of love between us. This is making me cry as I write this. And there were times when no bad feelings associated with the sensation happened. I called the guy who cleared the house and told him to come back after 5 days. When I called back, he told me that the dog was returning to the house to check up on us. I had a few more feelings like this after that, and I also heard a knock on our basement door after I stepped inside the door. When I opened the door, no one was there. I like to think it was my dog again. We finished our Reno and moved upstairs, and there have been no incidences since. When my parents got divorced, my mother moved to a nice lake house. She bought it from a widow whose husband had died of lung cancer. I'm not sure if he passed away in the house, but we do know that during his last years he would only stay in the house when he wasn't at the hospital, as they had no children. My sister and I assumed he passed away or spent most of his time on the second floor, where our 2 bedrooms and bathrooms were. Someone was leaning on it. My sister felt the same way. But when you're going to your room at night, you can be misled. We would also hear creaks in my dresser, like someone was leaning on it, and my sister felt the same way. But about someone sitting in her chair in her room and creaking it, we would both wake up in the middle of the night, and just an eerie feeling that we were being watched would prevail over us. Some doors that seemed to close when you did not recall opening them would be open or closed. My bedroom entrance had 2 double doors that opened inwards to the room, a walk-in closet door that opened inwards towards the closet, and a door to the bathroom that opened outwards towards the room with a double sink for my sister and me, and a door to a room with a shower and a toilet that happened towards it. There are also a couple of doors from my sister's room to where the sinks were and a door in our bedroom. The important thing is to recognize that the doors don't open by themselves in that many different directions. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I thought I heard someone move, and I quickly turned across and looked in the mirror, and there it was behind me. Immediately upon making eye contact with my reflection, all the second floor doors opened, and at the same time 6 left slammed echoes across the house. There were no windows, no air, and no reason for them to be open, as this is Minnesota in the winter, and the double doors that had been open slammed together. I felt trapped and ran to jiggle the bedroom door in order to try and flee running down the stairs. A few months later, I was heading up the stairs to go to the bathroom and bedroom after dinner. My sister had only been on the computer in my room immediately before dinner when we were on my computer. A few months later, I was heading upstairs towards my bedroom after dinner. My sister had been on the computer in the room before dinner when it was light out. But as it got darker while we ate, the only thing in my bedroom was my radiating Julie from the old iMac in my room. As I got to my room, I thought I saw something move, but again, the only light was from my dull Mac Blue computer screen. I turned to hit the light switch button, but before I thought I saw something move, so I stopped with my hand on the watch. Within the light cast by the computer, there was a shadow that was so unsimilar, and it began to move. It was 2 shadows, really, and they looked like legs. Slowly, the 2 legs moved again, like legs, but they were slowly walking towards me, like they were almost transparent, like light shining through wax paper. As they approached me, I screamed and threw the light switch, and I never slept on the second floor again. I was house sitting and taking care of the dogs for my aunt. It was an old farmhouse. Old as in the kitchen and the bathroom were added onto the house when working plumbing became a thing. I played some video games, watched a little TV, and we're just winding down to go to sleep. I was just laying there in the dark trying to doze off when I hear something coming from upstairs. The upstairs was an attic turned into bedrooms for my cousins. The way I could best describe it was like a pipe or a bottle. The sound of some kind of hollow object rolling back and forth across the floor in the room directly above me. I just sat there, wide-eyed and scared shitless. Finally, I worked up the courage to try and get up and turn the light back on, and the rolling sound continued. I told myself that it was just something in the walls trying to come up with any rational explanation. I got up and turned back to the TV, and were just kind of drowning out the sound with the lights on. Finally, I worked up the courage to get up and turn the lights back on. The rolling sound continued, and I told myself it was just something in the walls trying to come up with any rational explanation. I go up to turn the TV back on and just kind of drag out the sound. With the lights on, I noticed the dogs, two big Rottweilers, were sitting silently in the kitchen, hair bristling and staring at me. I backed away, honestly afraid they were going to attack me, but I realized they weren't staring at me. They were looking past the doors that go upstairs. Well, shit. They didn't even need to settle my nerves, but there was no way in hell I was going to get up to investigate. I clanked up the TV and eventually coached the dog into the living room, and when I was there, I tried again. I left on the TV, just turned it down, laid back down on the couch, and got some rest. I didn't know for how long I was asleep, just that when I woke up, it was still pitch black outside. What woke me up were the doors. My feet were hanging over the arm of the couch, and I was sleeping on the door that led upstairs. What woke me up was the door. My feet were hanging over the arm of the couch, and I was sleeping on the door that led upstairs. It had come open and hit me with my feet. If you've ever lived in an old house, you know that it's not too difficult to do. It's old after all. The house that had been warped far too many times by different writers rubs on the frame when you shut it. The kind you would have to put your shoulder into to close it all the way, as you'd really have to pull hard again to open it. Yet there it was, wide open in a pitch black staircase. The hinges creaked as it bumped against my dangling feet. I was up and out in seconds, the dogs right behind me. I put my shoes on the car, put the dogs in their kennels, and I was off to sweet civilization. I didn't care about using all the gas to drive out and feed my dogs every day. I wasn't spending another night in that house. I was maybe 11 when this happened. My dad was at a conference in Vancouver for the weekend, and so it was just my mom and me at home. I get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and all the lights in the house are off. I turn on the bathroom light and close the door mostly. I do my business and go to wash my hands. And I look in the mirror and see what looks like toothpaste speckles and the reflection of the crack of the door. I'm still washing my hands as I realize, no, I definitely washed the mirrors today. So curiosity gets the better of me. I turn 180 and look in the crack of the door, and boom, someone is looking back at me, eye to eye. And she didn't look happy to see me either. It's a girl, maybe early teens. Her hair was really lank and thin, almost greasy looking, as she probably looked a little overweight, or had a really flat round face. She was wearing to what my brain looked like a purple dress, except that she was all in grayscale. But, all night colors are different, so maybe that's why that didn't tip me off immediately. She had glasses on with thin wire frames, and I remember them distinctly because my mom wears glasses just like that. And the first thing I thought of was, what's my mom doing up? Maybe she has to go to the bathroom. Wait, why is my mom wearing her glasses in the middle of the night? And then it hits me. Oh shit. I can see the TV through my mom. Instantly, I freeze in terror. So I stand in the bathroom for what feels like half an hour, but was probably more like a minute, trying to figure out what to do and to give the mental fortitude to do so. So eventually I figure I just better deal with this right now. So I rip open the door, and everything I've got I can only describe as a whispering. Like how when you blow out a candle when the smoke dissipates into the air. She did that. So I stand in the open bathroom doorway for what probably was another minute, but feels like years, before I get up the courage to go down the hall into the bedroom and turn all the lights on and read until sunrise. There have been other less descriptive and intense experiences in my house as well, but that one was more intense than I thought it would be. You made it to the end. Not everyone does. Thanks for staying with me in the dark. If you enjoyed these stories, give it a like and hit subscribe so we can meet again in the next nightmare. Sleep tight, or try to.